Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this discussion of SB 1047 and the future of AI legislation. I'm Shannon Yavorsky, a partner in Orrick San Francisco office, and I co-lead our AI practice. I'm thrilled to be with you here today. To set the stage, SB 1047 was a significant piece of legislation that would have placed pretty strict guardrails on certain AI companies. It was passed by the California legislature, but was last Sunday vetoed by Governor Gavin Newsom. And the bill has been a flashpoint for debate, particularly in Silicon Valley for AI legislation, and has garnered reactions from various stakeholders, including tech giants and public policy experts. On one hand, you have Elon Musk offering public support for SB 1047, saying it was a tough call and would upset some people, but people that California should probably pass the law. And then you had Anthropic offering cautious support for the law, but proposing a long list of amendments. On the other hand, you had Dr. Fei Li, Stanford professor, widely considered to be the godmother of AI, commenting that the bill would have significant unintended consequences that would stifle innovation. You also had San Francisco Mayor London Breed weighing in saying more work needs to be done to bring together industry, government, and community stakeholders before moving forward with AI legislation. So it really sparked a heated debate about how to regulate AI effectively. So today we're going to talk about SB 1047, what the veto means, and where we're headed with AI legislation, both within California and across the US states. And I'm going to hand over to Jeremy Kudon, my partner in public policy, to do some intros.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you, everyone who could join us on such short notice today. We are thrilled to be able to talk to you today about this incredibly important uh, result or outcome. And while I think as you're about to hear, Governor Newsom's veto of SB 1047 is not going to be the final word on comprehensive AI regulation in the state legislatures. It's really just going to be the tip of the iceberg. Not only do we suspect that AI will return to the California legislature in 2025, but there are 49 other states that are not just waiting in the wings, but many are already out of the gates and turning for home. So I want to walk quickly through our agenda. My partner Shannon, who you just heard from, will begin with an overview of the current state of AI legislation and regulations. Shannon's a partner in Orrick's San Francisco office and heads up our cyber, privacy, and data innovation practice. She was also recently recognized, and congratulations for this, as a 2024 Women Leader in Tech Law for her pioneering work in AI compliance and strategy. We're then going to turn to Tom Kemp for a view of AI from the inside. For those of you who don't already know Tom, he is a Silicon Valley author, entrepreneur, and seed investor. He's also been recognized for his contributions to major privacy and AI laws, earning him commendations from state senates in California and Texas. And for anyone who knows anything about those two chambers, that's like, Tom, you may be the only thing in the world that they actually agree upon. I'll then take the baton and I'm going to spend a few minutes walking about, getting behind the phenomenon of AI bills in state legislatures, how the number of bills for AI compares to other white hot issues in the legislatures in the states, and then help those of you on the webinar identify the states that will truly matter on this issue in 2025. Finally, we are very privileged to have Ryan Harkins back clean up for us today. Ryan is Senior Director of Public Policy for Microsoft. In that role, he works on issues relating to technology and civil liberties, including state and federal privacy legislation, the regulation of AI, and voting rights. Ryan's been with Microsoft since 2007, and he's a non-resident fellow at Stanford Center for Internet and Society and serves as an adjunct professor at Seattle University School of Law. Ryan's going to provide us with an insider's perspective on the state of AI legislation, where he sees it heading in 2025 and beyond, and perhaps most importantly, ways that everyone on this webinar can engage on this issue in the state legislatures and at the federal level. Shannon, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Before we dive into California and the US, we wanted to take a moment to talk about the global context for AI legislation. At the core of this debate is a really delicate challenge: how to ensure AI safety without hindering innovation. And as AI technologies advance, they're increasingly viewed as critical to economic power and global influence. And this The pursuit of AI supremacy is often compared to a modern day arms race, where nations and industries are competing for technological leadership, but also the potential to reshape the global economy and geopolitical dynamics. So, balancing innovation with regulation is really, really critical. There are two distinct global approaches to AI legislation. And the first is creating a standalone law like the EU AI Act that's designed to be a single law to address AI technologies. Brazil has also followed the EU approach. And then the second involves empowering existing regulatory authorities to oversee AI. So, leveraging their current jurisdiction to address AI as it falls within their established framework. So, for example, in the US, you have the CFPB, the FTC, and the EEOC, who have all made it clear that they will enforce their respective laws and regulations to promote responsible AI innovation. In other countries around the world, in the UK, for example, the UK published a white paper saying that they don't intend to enact horizontal AI regulation in the near future. Instead, they support a principles-based framework for existing sector-specific regulators to interpret and apply to the development of use of AI within their domains. It's similar to the approach taken right now in other jurisdictions, for example, Australia and Israel, who have adopted similar approaches to promoting responsible AI innovation through policy and sector specific guidelines to address core issues and ethical principles. So right now, I've just provided a really high level overview of where we are globally with respect to AI legislation. You have the single law approach on the one hand, you have the letting existing bodies regulate AI on the other, and there's a lot of noise. There are hundreds of laws being proposed in the US, across the states, and also globally. These laws range from the mundane to regulating things that are seen to be potentially catastrophic. I think what's helpful is that the laws are in general thematic. So they fall within very specific buckets of safety, transparency. So making sure that AI is labeled as such, that you know that AI content was produced by AI, and accountability. So those are just some of the core themes that we're seeing emerge in this legislation. And so moving down to where we are with California, California often looks to what's happening in Europe. We saw that, and Ryan may have thoughts on this. We saw with California that they really looked to the GDPR, the European data protection legislation, to inspire the first comprehensive consumer privacy law, which was the California Consumer Privacy Act in California. We often see California looking to what's happening in Europe and is a first mover on legislation. And now we're in a situation where California has 32 of the top 50 AI companies. So this is really important to the California economy writ large. And there is a tremendous amount of focus on what's happening in the California legislature as it relates to AI. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tom to share his insights on SB 1047 and the broader implications for AI legislation. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Okay, so in terms of my biography, I think I just want to say that I've historically have worked with um, California privacy laws, and so I worked on Prop 24. And then most recently, the last few years, I've worked with State Senator Becker on two major pieces of legislation. Last year, it was the California Delete Act, which was involving the regulation of data brokers providing a common platform in which consumers can delete information. And this year, I worked on the California AI Transparency Act, and I was able to propose that. I drafted that, and I advised Senator Becker on that piece of legislation. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. And I should say that I don't speak for Senator Becker. And I think the other thing that I want to point out is that in the legislative process, that even though you put forth an initial proposal, it goes through the legislative sausage making process. And so what I originally drafted, was significantly modified. And in California, in the Assembly, there's a privacy subcommittee that really likes to put their fingerprints on bills in this area, not only in the privacy, but also on the AI space. So if you go to the next slide, let's actually, talk about the bills that actually didn't get through, and then I'll give an overview of the bills that did get signed. In fact, that there were 18 laws, and then I would be remiss if I did not talk about all the activity that's happening with the California Privacy Protection Agency. So as Shannon talked about on the next slide with 1047, if you go one more, please. With 1047, it sucked up all the oxygen out of the room, and it was an AI safety bill. And it was really targeting the largest models that people spending 100 million. Right now, people are not spending that much money, but it's very conceivable in the near future that people would. Now, at the high level, you actually ask yourself, what's it focused on? And the kind of the first model or types of models are the ones that cause mass casualties. And so you would just initially say to yourself, yeah, actually, we should have safety as it relates to bioweapons, radioactive, nuclear weaponry, chemical stuff, et cetera. I think then the other issue was that it also covered models that could cause $500 million worth of damage. And you could actually see that some sort of model that may cause a change in a stock price or does something from a financial transaction, it actually significantly broadens that. And I think the fundamental issue with 1047 was that it was incredibly prescriptive. And so if I look at my notes right here, that the prescriptive nature of it included that it required pre-training requirements, security measures, kill switches, testing procedures, pre-deployment requirements, post-deployment audit requirements, post-deployment compliance, incident reporting, and then it also formed government agencies to look after this. And so it was very complex, the actual bill itself. So if you go to the next slide, there was actually other two big pieces of legislation that also actually, let me talk about the veto itself with the actual governor. So if you flip it back one side, this is the veto statement. And so ironically, Newsom actually said it doesn't go far enough, and that he actually felt that the safety should also be applicable to critical decision making, which actually ironically was covered in the Bauer-Cahan Bill 2930, and the use of sensitive data, which actually is being addressed to some degree by the regulations coming forth from the CPPA. So that was the reason he gave. He formed a team of 3 individuals that will advise him. It's really to be determined what would happen after that. Then on the next slide, the other kind of 2 major AI bills that didn't get through are the aforementioned 2930 from Bauer-Cahan that provides the impact assessment, looking at bias, discrimination, requiring transparency for automated decision-making, and a much more prescriptive version of 942 that I worked on from Assemblymember Wicks that would require watermarking, require modifications to camera software, provide significantly more fines, A/B testing if watermarking has been removed, et cetera. So those are the bills that didn't make it. But again, 1047 kind of sucked up all the oxygen. So if you go to the next slide, there was in fact 18 bills in total that were signed. Now, some law firms do their assessment, say there were 17. I'm calling it 18, and I'll tell you why on the next slide. So if you go right there, that you can look at the broad categories of slides the broad categories of AI bills that came through. I think the first interesting thing is that California now has a uniform definition of AI. And I think one thematically thing that you look at is that the decision, instead of doing broad omnibus bills, that the focus of the vast majority of the legislation was focused on specific harms, harms involving deep fakes and pornography. So, dealing with what's happening in our schools with images being made of teachers and fellow students. There was significant concerns about elections and disinformation. And there was a telemarketing bill involving robocalls that actually has to specify and label that this robocall was actually generated by AI, which also you could actually put that bill as a fourth election and disinformation. But the area that I focused on was transparency and labeling. So if you go to the next slide, the bill that I mentioned before was SB 942, which is called the California AI Transparency Act. And what it would require is providers would need to, A, give the option to users to put some sort of manifest marker on the content, and the content is audio, images, and video that marks that it was AI generated. But that's a complete option that is given to the actual consumers. What's required is that the large AI providers must put a latent disclosure that's not discernible, that's not visible, that would provide basically labeling of the content. It could also be in the form of metadata associated with the actual files that are created that actually address the issue of, or help people address the issue, is it real or is it synthetic? The third aspect of the bill is the fact that, and this is unique of the bill, and I modeled the bill initially on Senator Schatz and Kennedy's AI Labeling Act, and I added this is, hey, you probably need something to actually read the latent disclosures to help consumers detect that. And so there's this concept of an AI detection tool. And it only applies to covered providers' creation. So there was some confusion out there that the large AI providers had to detect any and all content and determine if it was AI detected. No, it's applicable to them. And then also something that I'm also very happy about is there was an API needed for the AI detection tool. So I envisioned that eventually a developer or something on open source could provide a generic web page in which people could upload content, and it would go out there and check 30, 40, 50 AI providers and ask them if this was actually provided. And also take into account that the AI detection tool is in context with both the manifest and latent disclosures that are put in. So basically, it facilitates the ability to read the disclosures that are required. And there's also some downstream licensing requirements associated with the actual bill. In the end, I think the opposition in the tech industry saw this as a less prescriptive bill than what Assembly Member Wicks put forth. And so there was no technical opposition involved in the end, and it was signed by Governor Newsom. There was also another transparency bill that there was an organization called the Transparency Coalition that would require developers of GenAI systems to post documentation regarding that. And so this is a really interesting bill because there's 12 areas in which they have to disclose information, including source of data set and owners, copyright material, which is a big issue. If the data that they're generating the content on is purchased or licensed, if it has personal information, if it has aggregated consumer information, and also the time period that's collected. So if you go to the next slide, please, that last but not least, that we also have to look at what's going on in California in the context of the AI regulations. So on the next slide, kind of the current lay of the land is the following. First of all, stepping far back, that I worked on Prop 24, the CPRA. There was a definition, 1798.185, that it's one sentence, and it says the CPPA will create regulations regarding automated decision-making, which really in this context is AI. And the CPPA has provided at least 20 pages of regulations that you can see on the right. And so what's happened over the last 6 months, it's been actually hotly debated within the CPPA board if this is too much and whether or not the CA legislature should be taking the lead. And it was interesting that there was supposed to be a board meeting last Friday to discuss this, and it got pushed to November. So maybe there's still some more discussions happening behind the scenes. I don't know. I think some of the concerns is that, for example, unlike Colorado, where a consumer could object if a decision is fully made based on AI, the language is a lot looser in California. So the point is that you have to look at what's happening in AI, not only the context of these 18 laws, but also in the context of what the CPPA is doing, because it's a pretty in-depth set of regulations if get approved. So that's done with my presentation there. Sorry about the slides in the beginning. Is there any question, Jeremy? You have any questions for me?
I do have some questions. So tell us more about the Disclosure Act. For instance, what was the debate, if you recall, over text and whether to have AI generated text have a disclosure? I mean, I'm sure for schools, this has become a big issue.
Yeah, that was it's very difficult. Now, Google Synth ID can actually do a much better job. So ironically, what was happening in the context of the conversations that we were having with industry, and by the way, it was a very collaborative process, and we took their feedback, and in the end, we were able to get no formal opposition lodged to the governor regarding this. But yeah, text is a tough issue. I think at the very minimum, we wanted maybe some sort of disclosure metadata if it created a text file, but it just became too difficult. The thing that one of the things that I wanted that also got cut was that the ability for consumers to ask a chat bot if you were AI or not, because oftentimes when you get that little search or not search, talk to a tech support, you don't really know if you're really talking, and so there should be a means or mechanism to ask right there. But one thing I want to be very clear on is that that this is not 942 was not designed to solve all issues regarding is it real or is it synthetic, because we did this bill in the context knowing that there was actually over 30 bills submitted, and that some of them were going to be very specifically focused like on deep fakes and pornography, and that there was 3 or 4 bills focused on elections and disinformation, et cetera. So we wanted to provide a general platform and provide tools for consumers, but we do realize that there are specific harms that do need more focused bills.
Tom, with 1047's veto and kind of the promise from both the governor, and we heard Senator Weiner, I think Weiner has been out in the press in the last couple of days, as recently as today, saying that he wants to work with the governor on a new bill. What would you suggest to people listening to this today or watching this today, how they could engage in the process so that they have more of a voice? I think that was a bit of a frustration from the industry's perspective, is that a bill passed in May that not many members of the actual industry being regulated had any idea about.
Yeah, I think Weiner would probably disagree with that, because he, I testified 3 times on behalf of 942, and oftentimes in the same committee. 1047 was there, and he kind of went through painfully. He went through how many times he talked with people. But the issue is that no one really knows what the trio of experts will do in terms of how empowered they will be, and to what extent that they will take industry feedback. Obviously, one of the people that you mentioned actually opposed the bill, et cetera. So it's to be determined what this trio, how much power they have, and to what extent the governor. But he also said, the governor, quote unquote, that he will continue to work with the legislature on this critical matter during its next session. And this past year, the legislature proposed over 30 bills, 18 got through. So I wouldn't be surprised if Weiner came back with another AI safety bill, and Bauer-Kahn came back with their bias discrimination bill, blah, 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 blah. But to me, I would not be surprised if there's another 25, 30 bills, and there could also be a stalking horse to Weiner's bill with AI safety, much like Wicks and Becker had a labeling bill. So that's very possible. And then you have to look into the context of whether or not the AI regulations come through, because one of the issues that Newsom brought up was, well, what about the coverage of sensitive personal information? But in theory, the regulation. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen. And so I do know for a fact that the legislature is going to come back with another 25, 30 bills. I'm pretty confident, just based on what people are talking about, that there's going to be another wave of AI related laws.
Are there other states that you think will take on the Disclosure Act or follow the Disclosure Act? Do you think this will be something all 50 states will have, or is it enough that California has it that the industry is essentially now going to be subject to this everywhere?
Well, you could argue that because of the way that California is written, that it should cover all the large providers, and I would be surprised if an AI provider would somehow have IP lookup to say this person's in California, but this person's not, so I'm not going to allow this to happen. But I do know for a fact that a lot of the civil society groups are looking to provide model laws based on some of the things that were passed in California. And so I would not be surprised that coming from the 18 bills, that there will probably be 3 or 4 or 5 proposed model state laws that heavily leverage that. So I think you'll see in the next 2 or 3 months 4 or 5 model bills being proposed by some of these same civil society groups that will be shopped around, and it's very likely that you'll see the specific harms in election, deep fakes, labeling, transparency. I don't know yet. We haven't gotten to the stage of having an AI safety law of significance being passed that would then become a cut and paste model that people could use.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. This bill is so important, especially in a world of deep fakes and the danger of those. So thank you so much for everything you did on this. I want to start with something that was once a fairly provocative statement. Today, it's accepted as a matter of fact, and that is that it has become almost impossible to pass a bill through Congress. And if you don't believe me, just ask our friends in the crypto and cannabis industries. These days, everything, and I mean everything, is done in the 50 state legislatures. So if you like your laws or regulations with a side of chaos, welcome to the United States in 2024. As Shannon alluded to earlier, few issues have created more chaos than the regulation of artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. What's happened in the States with respect to AI is simply unprecedented. Let's start with 2022, which is the year that ChatGPT went mainstream. That year, 67 bills were introduced. That's a decent number. I mean, it's a big issue. A year later, that number tripled to 190 bills introduced. That, as we'll see in a moment, is a much bigger issue. And then a staggering 725 bills were introduced in the last 9 months of 2024. And that's just a silly number. How silly? Let's go to the next slide. I want to compare AI right now to 2 other issues that have dominated the state legislatures for the past 8 years or so: sports betting and data privacy. As you can see with sports betting, we've had at the high water mark was 150 bills in 2020. Next to that, just if you're interested, is how many of those bills were enacted. So a lot more activity earlier on with sports betting, which is probably because the pent up demand for that, because a federal law had to be repealed before states could actually do anything on it. Then you have comprehensive data privacy, an issue that many of you are familiar with. Many of you have transitioned or do both right now between data privacy and AI. As you can see, the high water mark was 300 bills in 2020 again. Not many bills passed that year anyway because of COVID. But if you look at the years after that, we're hovering around 200 bills. And then something I just want to note or point out, it took a couple years for data privacy or comprehensive data privacy legislation to really hit its, get momentum in the states. So just because 300 bills were introduced in 2020, we didn't see real action until just the last 2 years. With AI, again, you're seeing this trend. I think we're only going to go even farther than 725. Let's go to the next slide. I think this begs the question of why is AI so very popular in the state legislatures? And there's been a lot of ink spilled over the years about what motivates a legislator to introduce a bill and what leads to a bill being passed. A lot of conversation about contributions, about outsized influence. I've been doing this for 15 years in state legislatures, helping companies pass bills or sometimes shape legislation. And I'll tell you, the number one factor for any legislator will always come down to, is this something that my voters or the voters in my district care about? And for governors, is it something that my state cares about? This January 2024 poll from the AI Policy Institute tells you pretty much all you need to know. When asked what candidate a voter would prefer, or the voters that were surveyed, 76% said they prefer a candidate who says that government should should pass legislation regulating AI because the risks it poses are so large. That I see polls on all sorts of issues all the time. You just never see numbers quite like this. I don't think we can get 76% of people to agree on what day of the week it is, much less on a policy issue like this. Then again, maybe it's not that surprising. Next slide, please. For the past 40 years, popular culture has led people to believe that AI is dangerous and could lead to something like, well, the Terminator. It's going to take time to change that perception. And until that perception changes, I think it's safe to assume that we're going to continue to see between 600 and 800 AI bills in the state legislatures each year. Now, just to be fair, many of these bills are deep fake bills, something that Tom's legislation that he worked on will help address. So we're really talking maybe 100 or 200 comprehensive bills. But for any of you who have tried to track this issue on, with monitoring services or just on your own, those 700 bills still will populate your fields when you're searching for AI legislation. So it's still very hard. It makes it almost impossible to track legislation and identify the bills that actually matter. And why that's important is because if you have 700 bills that you're tracking, you can miss an SB 1047, the bill that actually is going to start to gain steam. Let's move to the next slide, please. What I'd like to do, or what I want to do with the group right now is quickly walk through how to make this number more manageable. Like I said, you're still going to have 600 to 800 bills next year. There's no way to stop that. That's going to be the case for the next 2 or 3 years. But what I try to do for clients is make this more manageable by limiting that number to 8 or 10, 12 states that have the highest probability of passing a bill like SB 1047 that actually mean something to your businesses or to your company. And then third, they could potentially serve as a precedent for other states to follow. This isn't going to just only reduce the number of bills that you need to follow, but as Ryan's going to discuss in a few moments, it's going to give you a chance to help shape those bills. So what I try to do when companies ask me to do this on any issue is I look for something that was similar, an analog issue. For car sharing, an issue we worked on with Turo and GetAround, we looked at what states had Uber and Lyft bills and took action on those bills. With sports betting, we looked at which states passed fantasy sports bills, and it was almost aligned. 24 of the 25 states that passed online sports betting had fantasy sports bill. And it goes so on and so on. Video streaming taxes, we used taxes on cable or satellite. Our success rate's about 80%. So just so when we're doing this, it does work. With AI, I can't think of any better example or analog than data privacy. In fact, the history of the issue of data privacy is almost turning out to be identical to AI. Everyone started by thinking that data privacy would be regulated by Congress or there'd be comprehensive legislation at the federal level. That didn't happen. So Europe then passed the GDPR. California followed with the CCPA, and 19 other states since then have passed their own comprehensive data privacy laws. Some that look like California, some that don't. That's important because, as you've seen, something very similar has been happening here. We have the EU AI Act. We almost had SB 1047, and we have all these states following that same path. So let's populate our map to account for this analog. Next slide, please. As you'll see, we've already eliminated 30 states from consideration just by focusing on states that have passed comprehensive data privacy legislation. I think we should add 2 more states to the mix. Don't worry, I'll have a slide that actually has the actual states' names on them. Can we go to the next slide? What I would also add to this map is Illinois and New York. While neither ever have had a chance or have been successful in passing data privacy yet, Illinois has passed its biometric law, which is almost a predecessor to CCPA. And then New York was a leader. It's one of the only states that actually requires crypto companies to get a license to operate in the state. And aside from California, it had the most AI bills in the country in 2024. Let's go to the next slide. This is still far too many states. So what I want to do is get us down to like 14 states. And here we go. And so what we do is, and we're going to show tiers in a minute, I removed Montana, Delaware, Iowa, Kentucky, Nebraska, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. They're all great states. They just don't meet one of the criterias, which is they're not that big. And even for the ones that are big, they're not usually looked at as states that are precedential in nature. That is, that other states will follow. States that you see in red are all states that we believe are precedential. And when you see that little siren next to it, those are states that we think could be particularly active in 2025. California, of course, will come back. Colorado should have a siren, by the way. The governor has said that he is going to amend the comprehensive data AI law that they passed last year. They're the only state in the country with a comprehensive AI law. And then Oregon, we've heard a lot of chatter about with doing something here. Texas is a 2-year legislature. So next year is the only year in the next 2 years that they'll be dealing with AI, and they just passed a data privacy law, and so on and so forth. Connecticut was an early data privacy state and almost passed a bill very similar to Colorado's last year. That still has 14 states. So I recognize that's still a lot for many of you, especially the startups who are on this call today. So let's go to the next slide. I've got one more trick for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. So the way I organize every state legislative campaign when we're at a national level is you create tiers. And I usually go maybe up to 4 tiers, but we're going to do 3 today. Tier 1, these are the states that are most likely to act. They're too big to ignore. And there's other motivating factors. They're also the precedential states. These are states that other states will say, oh, I want to do AI. Let's see what Maryland did, or what, of course, California did, or Texas did. So as you can see from this list, are 8 states for this group. And these are the 8 states that if you're only going to focus on 8 states, focus on these. That will likely take your 750 bills down to maybe 75, 80 bills. That's a much more manageable number to track. And more importantly, only 8 states to actually have to engage in, however you choose to do that. So you can see the states on the list here. Tier 2, these are states that have the potential to act. Many of them are some of the biggest states in the country. They have a precedent risk, but just based on A, their experience with data privacy, again, a similar issue, and B, other issues that those legislatures are dealing with, or just the dynamics of the legislature. Florida, for instance, has a much bigger issue they're dealing with right now, and that could end up taking over their entire 5-month session next year. But you look at that: Florida, Illinois, Indiana, New York, Tennessee, and Virginia. Tier 3 were the states I mentioned before. There is definitely a potential to act. It is not out of the realm of possibility that Delaware could pass an AI, comprehensive AI bill. It's just not going to be as precedential as the other states will be. And again, this is not about how important a state is versus another. It's also about just your time and your ability to engage. This is one of the hardest things about dealing with 50 state legislatures. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to give his perspective. He's been on the front lines of this for the last 3 years at least. And also how you can engage. I think, Ryan, you're going to talk about that as well.
Sure. So thank you, Jeremy. And first, thank you to Shannon and the Orrick team for having me to talk about one of my favorite topics. Jeremy highlighted the fact and put his finger on that what is happening here, I think, is a confluence of both a policy problem and a political problem. And if you take the latter first, I think, and this has been the case for tech regulation for several years, if you go and talk to any state lawmaker, and this is true of Republicans and Democrats, it's true no matter whether they're from a big state like California or a smaller state like Delaware, they will tell you that they are motivated to act in this space in part out of a concern that Congress has not and will not act. And we've seen this in other spaces. I mean, we at Microsoft have been calling, for instance, for comprehensive privacy legislation since 2005. And we're still waiting for Congress to act, despite the fact that, as Jeremy put it, 20 states have now enacted comprehensive privacy laws, and we will inevitably see more states enact comprehensive privacy laws this next year. So inaction at the federal level is leading to action in state capitals. The other is that there are a host of legitimate policy concerns that constituents and then ultimately lawmakers are raising about AI. I mean, we at Microsoft are obviously very excited and bullish about the potential of AI. But we also acknowledge concerns people are raising and are clear-eyed about those concerns. My team was also tracking over 700 pieces of legislation in state capitals related to AI this last year. That's not an accident. And we are seeing that state lawmakers are increasingly collaborating with one another across states. So many of the lawmakers that are active in AI legislation were also the same people who were active in sponsoring privacy laws. And several of them have organized a working group, an informal working group. So Senator James Maroney from Connecticut, Senator Rodriguez from Colorado, Representative Capriglione from Texas, among others, are part of this effort to focus on a number of different issue areas. They've formed subcommittees. They're proposing legislation, and they are motivated to ensure that what in their view happened with social media, meaning that it was largely unregulated, does not happen with AI. They produced bills like Connecticut SB 2, upon which the Colorado AI Act was ultimately modeled. And what we have heard is that they intend to run similar bills or have similar bills introduced and run in multiple states next year, which means that there will be a lot more activity for people like Jeremy and Tom and Shannon and me to work on. So, you know, California in some ways, look, as California goes, perhaps the rest of the country will go. And the range of different bills we saw in Sacramento this last year was, in a lot of ways, a microcosm for the range of different types of bills we saw across the country. SB 1047 was, I think, to put it mildly, a bit polarizing. As was noted earlier, virtually all of tech and the VC community and others raised serious concerns with the bill. We ultimately were not surprised by Governor Newsom's veto. I think just reading the tea leaves leading up to his decision, we thought it seemed likely he would veto it, although it was far from a foregone conclusion. And I think it's really worth reading his veto statement. Governor Newsom did not simply come out and say, you know, the idea of implementing safety and security protocols relating to AI is a bad idea altogether. He instead focused in particular on the threshold for regulation, the fact that the trigger was by and large the cost and number of computations that a model would engage in, and went on to say that he thinks there's a role for California to play in this space. And not only that, but he, as was alluded to earlier, has started an initiative with some very influential players, Dr. Fei-Fei Li with Stanford, Dean Shays, the dean of UC Berkeley's College of Computing, Data Science, and Society, et cetera, to lead efforts to figure out what California should do when it comes to safety protocols for the deployment of GenAI. So it's a long way of saying that I think it would behoove the industry, and there are industry players who are doing this, but to think hard about not just what you don't like or you oppose, but what you can be for. And that's an approach that we at Microsoft have tried to take on a number of different issues and are trying to take in the AI space. You know, we engaged with Senator Wiener throughout the legislative process on SB 1047. We were asked very early on by Governor Newsom and by Senator Wiener to provide feedback on his proposal. I think Senator Wiener is a very smart and thoughtful and dedicated lawmaker, and his bill, for those of you who followed it closely, changed dramatically through the course of the session. And we certainly appreciated all of the engagement that he and his office had with us. Now, ultimately, we told him that we couldn't support the bill because, fundamentally, we think issues relating to safety and security protocols for models need to be handled at the federal level. And although I usually agree with lawmakers who roll their eyes about whether the feds will do anything on relevant tech issues, I actually think there's more happening in DC on model safety and security than perhaps is widely recognized. But we are without question going to see more legislation on a range of different topics, not just in California, but in other states across the country. And so I think it would behoove industry to get involved. If you're not a member of a trade association, you should be one. If you don't have a lobbyist or aren't engaged in the process, particularly in your home state, you should get engaged because there is a real need to educate policymakers about how the technology works, to educate policymakers about the upside that the technology brings, while also being willing to sit down and acknowledge problems and to try to work on solutions. So it reminds me, Jeremy, of the old phrase that I've heard before, that no matter what happens, the lawyers win out in the end. There will be plenty of work this next year and moving forward for people who work in this space.
Ryan, thank you so much. And I'm so interested to hear about the work at the federal level. Can you talk a little more about that? Because you heard me at the beginning just basically saying nothing ever will happen, but it's encouraging to hear that this might be the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity that's transpired, certainly over the past 12 months, on the creation of safety and security standards for models. So, you can go all the way back to the voluntary commitments that the White House announced in July of last year, from leading AI companies to advance the discussion around safety and security of frontier systems. Those include requirements to test systems for safety and security risks. Those voluntary commitments ultimately fed into the executive order that the Biden administration issued in October of 2023. The United States government has worked through or with the G7 to develop a code of conduct for developers of advanced AI. We've seen the federal government stand up the U.S. AI Safety Institute, which is part of a growing network of safety institutes around the world. They are going to convene in San Francisco at the end of November to launch work streams on how to do capability evaluation and risk assessments for advanced systems. This was one of the concerns we raised with Senator Wiener about his bill, namely that while we're all concerned about the potential for critical harms relating to AI systems, the science and measurement techniques that will be required to evaluate those types of risks and those potential harms aren't yet there. And there's more work that needs to be done to develop those things. And we've even seen Congress, albeit I share my I have a healthy dose of skepticism about what Congress can or cannot do, but we have seen them stand up AI task forces and begin to draft bipartisan AI bills. So there is a lot of activity that is happening in DC and frankly internationally to advance this particular part of the AI conversation.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question before I turn it to open up to the entire panel questions. But the next question is influential trade associations. You mentioned it broadly. I was wondering if you had a few that you could recommend. We've gotten a couple questions about that. So I think that might be helpful.
I think I mean, it really depends on the state that's relevant and where you're operating. I mean, in some, respects, all politics is local. So in California, I certainly think the Cal Chamber has done a good job of organizing the business community's feedback and concerns on a range of different bills. We're a prominent member of BSA, the Business Software Alliance, which I think is best in class in terms of its substantive chops and the like. So those are just a couple. I also think there is a broader recognition of the role that states are playing in the policy space and perhaps the outsized influence that state capitals have right now, and the extent to which what is happening in one venue is influencing what happens in another. So we know that state lawmakers are collaborating with one another and sharing ideas on what regulation should look like in this space, and not just through traditional groups like NCSL or CSG, but through this task force or working group they've stood up. But we also know that state lawmakers in particular are being influenced by what's happening in the EU, both indirectly because they can see the news and they can pick up a copy of and read the EU AI Act, but also, in some ways directly. So we've had lawmakers in Sacramento tell us that they are in fact communicating with and sharing ideas with EU lawmakers in Brussels. We know the EU has an office in San Francisco and a senior envoy to the United States focusing on digital and tech issues. And so if for no other reason than the sort of precedential effect and the fact that what is happening in state capitals is influencing perhaps what happens in DC, in Brussels, elsewhere, and vice versa, it's worth the business community and tech more broadly get more engaged in these policy conversations in state capitals.
Great. I'll give a plug really quick, and then I'm going to go right to Shannon and to Tom as well to ask them a couple questions. But want to give a plug. If those of you are looking like, hey, how do I track this? Just go to orrick.com. On the front homepage is an AI resource center. You can just click on it. It tracks legislation. Good opportunity just to be able to keep in touch with what's going on. We're also going to add to that the names of the governor, Senate president, and speaker for each of the states that we identified today, the 14 states. We'll have that up in the next several days. And if worse comes to worse and you can't find the trade association, A, just feel free to reach out. But B, you can write a letter and you can tell them what your view is. And in many instances, the staffer who is monitoring that email, when I say many, in about 20% of times, they will get that email and they might reach out and say, hey, I'd like to hear your view on this, because AI is complicated, incredibly complicated. And they're looking to hear the views of industry from people like yourselves, from people like Ryan, obviously. But that's just another way. It's more of a do-it-yourself way. Again, feel free to reach out. That's the plug. Let's now go. Shannon, early on in the conversation, there was someone I think mentioned a question about the about 1047 and whether this was a good or a bad thing for the AI industry. I know that's a loaded question. I understand, as you pointed out at the beginning, there's both sides, or there's two sides of this, maybe even three sides. What's your view? Was this a good or bad thing that happened for the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I think, as Governor Newsom said, I think the bill was really well intentioned. It certainly had had safety that was central to the development of that legislation, but it really didn't take into account whether an AI system was deployed in high-risk environments involving critical decision-making or the use of sensitive data. And instead, it applied really stringent standards to even basic functions, which just seemed not exactly right. And I think at this point, it's really important that the legislation that's passed is very thoughtful. And I think that, similar to what Newsom said, we need more we need guardrails, but they need to be clear and they need to be calibrated to the risks. And I think that's what the trio, the panel of experts, is going to go away and consider how to contour a law that will address the flaws that we saw within SB 1047.
Do you have a view?
Yeah, I think 1047 was too prescriptive and maybe too broad. It was probably too much of a platform. And in California, the only major tech platform was the CCPA, and that had the threat of Alistair McTaggart in 2018 putting a ballot initiative on. And so just kind of wearing my policy hat and what you can get through, I think it would have been better to kind of chunk up the AI safety bill into maybe 2 or 3 or 4 bills and then snap it on for specific harms, and make it more of a Lego building block that built on top of additional Lego pieces like the CCPA as amended by CPRA. And so what I've personally found is that if you kind of try to introduce your own Uber omnibus platform, it gets everyone involved, and if there's objection to one piece or part, then the whole thing goes down. And I think from a realpolitik perspective, that it could have been chunked up. And you look at examples like what I worked on, the California Delete Act, was built on top of the pre-existing CCPA and the Data Broker Registry, and we snapped on top of that. Senator Stern came out with a cyberbullying bill that snapped on top of a pre-existing piece of legislation, et cetera. So I just think that, to what Shannon said, it was definitely laudable what was trying to be accomplished. I just think that maybe it could have focused more on particular harms, and been less prescriptive, and as opposed to trying to propose too much of a broad platform for tech regulation. And those are very difficult things to get through. So hopefully Senator Wiener or some other politician, or the trio of people that Newsom can actually do what actually got passed, which was 17 or 18 kind of specific harm bills that got through that worked. And for the most part, there was great collaboration between the policymakers and industry to get those through. And a good example of that is SB 942, the bill that I worked on, that there was great collaboration. And I think that, to what Ryan said, that there was acknowledgement that there is harm happening in this particular case with deep fakes and consumers not being clear what's real and what's synthetic.
Ryan, I'm going to end with you. What are the 5 states that you think that people should be focused the most on? Or maybe even 3. I gave 8 to 14. I hope that's not too hard, and I didn't give you any fair warning of it, but.
It's a fair question. And, we're still thinking through on our end how to prioritize all the activity we're going to see next year. Just off the top of my head, California obviously will continue to be important. I think several of the states you mentioned are going to be important. Colorado passed the Colorado AI Act, but Governor Polis and General Weiser and Senator Rodriguez have all indicated that they want to go back and revisit it next year. So that certainly is a place worth paying attention to. Senator Maroney in Connecticut continues to be very influential in this space, and he's someone who, from our vantage point, I think is very thoughtful and reasonable, and hardworking. And he will inevitably, come back with whatever the next iteration is of SB2, a bill that, look, we at Microsoft supported on the record. We thought it was a very reasonable framework. And, New York and Texas, I think, are both states certainly worth paying attention to. We know in Texas, Representative Capriglione, is working on drafting a bill of some sort and has been submitting or accepting stakeholder feedback on what that could look like. So, but look, with over 700 bills introduced last year, more expected this next year. There will inevitably be states that we're not anticipating, where I think we'll be surprised and we'll see bills that are active and moving.
This is great. Hopefully we can all get together maybe in January, February, revisit this, have, a follow-up for everyone. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate everybody who was able to make it. Thank you, Tom, Ryan, and of course, Shannon. Really appreciate your time.